Empires rise, empires fall. Empires invade, destroy, force relocation, conquer, exile, and murder. That's what empires do. In the biblical story that was just read, the Hebrews of Judah had been brutally invaded, their city of Jerusalem largely destroyed, and many of its inhabitants deported. Those who remained continued to cultivate the land, though they were destitute, subjected to violence and instability, and vulnerable to marauding bands. This is the chaos and cruelty manufactured by empires. Nehemiah, one of the people who had been deported, served King Artaxerxes I of Persia as his cupbearer. In the era of this Babylonian empire, the cupbearer was also part of the king's security detail, as he tested all of the wine and all of the food the king would consume to be certain that it had not been poisoned. So it was a responsible, but also a vulnerable position, as his life depended on the king's well-being. And the rulers of empires are often not noted for being stable, rational people. In this context, Nehemiah suddenly has a visit from home. One of my brothers came with some other men from Judah, he says. I asked them about the Hebrews who had escaped and survived the captivity and about Jerusalem. They told me, those in the province who survived the captivity are in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been destroyed by fire. And he continues, when I heard this news, I sat down and wept. I mourned for days, fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Those are words from the first chapter of the book of Nehemiah. We can easily skip over this story as simply an ancient, faraway, hard to comprehend tale. We've been numbed by the words and are in danger of tuning them out. Words like king, anger, trouble, shame, ruin, destruction, disgrace, mocking, rebellion, and on and on. Every one of these words conjure up an environment, just as every word that we hear today contributes to the ethos of this nation. But while some words have the ability to inspire and teach and create, we can easily allow negative, hostile words to inoculate us, injecting just enough venom not to immediately kill us, but to make us immune to and passive within the horrors that are going on. Empires rise, empires fall, empires invade, destroy, force relocation, conquer, exile, and murder. That's what empires do. These words are not only descriptive, there is another purpose for the words such as the ones I just mentioned. They are used intentionally to foment a chaotic environment. None of these are creative, instructive, compassionate, and life-giving words. Let me remind you again what they were. Anger, trouble, shame, ruin, destruction, disgrace, mocking, rebellion. We must pay attention to words that are repeated over and over again, as they quickly and very easily become part of the daily scene, normalized within a chaotic and cruel environment. But I remind you of another type of chaos, the kind that happens in a cocoon, as I mentioned in the last two sermons that I delivered on the darkness and the transformation of the cocoon. What appears to be utter chaos is really the dissolution of one state to become the next, more developed and creative state. Caterpillar to butterfly. What appears to be utter chaos is reflected in the Hebrew and Christian creation narrative. Remember that? The wind, the Spirit of God blew over the chaos, the emptiness, the void, and incrementally something took shape. Empires are not new, and they're not over. Their intentions and methods of operating are also not new, nor a thing of the past. Power over, territorial expansion, and wealth are worshipped as gods. Human dignity and the networks and structures of community are the collateral damage that result from heavy-handed authoritarian overreach. It was true in King Artaxerxes' time, and it is sharply visible today. Empires and the exploits of the reigning lords leave weeping and mourning and devastation and hopelessness in their wake. Nehemiah was confronted with the news that his homeland had been reduced to rubble, to chaos. It was after weeping and fasting and praying that he summoned the courage to ask for a leave of absence from the king who had deported him, to help his fellow Hebrews reconstruct their dwellings and their protections. What appeared as utter chaos to the Hebrews remaining in Judah and to those like Nehemiah who had been deported began to change as one man took a risk, requested the unthinkable, made a journey back, connected with one individual, then another, and joined by yet others to get a mammoth project done. One pocket of change at a time ultimately transformed their homeland into a safe haven again. Could they have anticipated that at the outset? I don't think so. There were hurdles, there were threats, and interruptions demanding constant vigilance and pivoting. Chaos is disorienting, infuriating, exhausting, and fear-inducing. But it is not a fatal condition. Figuratively speaking, chaos makes traveling more difficult as it puts sand in the gears. It smears roadways with slick oil, so to speak. Essentials are ripped away, maybe replaced, maybe taking longer wait times, higher prices, or they may be replaced with nothing. Our human impulse is either to feel paralyzed or to fight back, to respond in kind, to lash out, if not physically, at least with words. That feels like resistance, and it makes us feel less vulnerable. Resistance isn't only opposition. It must include an aspect of creativity if it is to set itself apart from the chaotic forces. Nehemiah resisted the temptation to respond in kind and chose to forge community, what Rossi was talking about, to work together with others, to build and to restore. Would Nehemiah have broken out of his role in the king's court had he not been met with the report of chaos in Judah? Was chaos necessary for creative forward movement to occur? It's interesting to note that our oldest story, that of creation, along with the oldest stories of every religion and within mythology, chaos is always shown as necessary to bring about creation. That's a bit hard to swallow, given the amount of cruelty and destruction that often accompanies chaos. But from within, and despite chaos, something percolates, something gestates, something entirely new emerges from out of that cocoon. When a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the ability to shift the entire system to a higher order, says Ilya Prigogine, Russian-born Belgian physical chemist, who received a Nobel Prize for chemistry in 1977. I want to repeat that quote. When a complex system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. That was revolutionary to me as I was thinking about and trying to understand this present moment and our role in it. When you think about Nehemiah summoning courage to ask the king for permission and protection and documentation to return to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, that began the formation of an island of coherence. When he recruited builders and rebuffed hecklers, adding security, he was strengthening the islands of coherence. When his courage flagged and he spent nights walking the walls and talking with the divine, he was expanding the islands of coherence. Can we think of our troubles and turmoil in this way? Rather than focus on the incessant chaotic decisions, the cruel chaotic actions, the combative chaotic rhetoric, can we invest in islands, our own islands of coherence? Can we build, connect vision, dream, and not sink into hopelessness, at least not long term? This does not minimize the real threats, the real destruction of democracy every day of every week, the real trauma inflicted on people, on our global siblings, human and more than human, and on our Mother Earth. These continue, but they do not need to continue unabated. The BBC ran an article in 2019 about nonviolent resistance. The 3.5% rule is a concept of political science suggesting that nonviolent movements need only about 3.5% of a population to actively participate in order to achieve significant political or social change. The challenge, however, overcoming apathy and getting people to take action. These nonviolent movements aren't limited to what takes place on the streets with signs of protest, though these are important and included, but also every nonviolent initiate to create cohesion, community, compassion. Isn't that what we do each week when we get together? Don't our small groups, our meditation and music nights, our informal fellowship times cultivate islands of coherence? Isn't this the unconscious reason for smiling at a stranger? Or allowing someone into the line from the outside? Isn't this one reason we carefully separate the recyclables and do our best to limit fast food out of love of nature and our Mother Earth? Islands of coherence. Islands of coherence are shored up each time we create. When we paint, or write poetry, or write music, care for a plant, or cook a meal. Each time we remind ourselves of who we are and what our values are. Each time we stop to listen to the bird song at sunrise or at sunset. Each time we spend even 3 minutes of mindful, deep breathing, preferably with an indigenous flute. 3.5% of the population rising up to be heard, to be seen, to create islands of coherence. The road from chaos to coherence is not fantastical nor impossible. It's also not quick, easy, nor without hurdles. Creation happens incrementally over billions of years, one island of coherence at a time. Remember Nehemiah and his painstaking work. In fact, pull out your own Bibles this afternoon. Read the book of Nehemiah. It's only 13 chapters. You'll gain a new sense of appreciation for persevering through enormously hard times. Empires rise. Empires invade, destroy, force relocation, conquer, exile, and murder. Empires fall. That's what empires do. But we remind each other what appears to be utter chaos is really the dissolution of one state to become the next, more creative, whole, and life-giving state, just as is the case in the metamorphosis of the caterpillar to the butterfly. Something entirely new emerges. We won't go back to how things are. We can't, and we don't want to. It is imperative that we are solidly connected to community, to nature, to God, and relentlessly committed to periods of silence through this time. This is our moment. This is our time. We have the capacity to shift the entire system to a higher order. May God help us with that.